Everybody, I'm excited because I have followed Craig for quite a long time, and I am excited because I've seen so many amazing things that they grow and sell in Australia. Welcome, Craig, to the Flower Podcast.
Thank you, Scott. It's an honor to be on your podcast. I really appreciate you reaching out to me.
Well, it's my pleasure. I am continually jealous of some of the products I see. And, my age old question I always ask is I wish I could get them, but I know I just have to know that I can't. But there's so many things that we're going to talk about. Some of them I know for sure that I can't help, but I have a little bit of flower jealousy going on here because I see so many amazing flowers. You have been in the business for a minute, and I'd love to hear the story of kind of how you got involved in the flower industry, what you do, kind of maybe what your business looks like, and I'd love to hear the story.
Yeah, okay. Well, it goes back a few generations. My great grandfather grew flowers and sold them in a small business, which was a mixed business, produce business, in the Sutherland Shire, which is in New South Wales, Australia. He um, he, he started that business and it went well. His daughter um, also had a florist in Bondi, which is everybody would know Bondi, for a number of years. And then she eventually came back and ran the florist in the Sutherland Shire at Sutherland. It was in a great location. It was the train would come in, the people would get off the train and walk down past the florist shop to the cemetery. So it
Mm.
was a big location. A lot of people would use that train, walk past the florist shop to the cemetery, and it became one of Sydney's busy forests. My
So it was like a retail
Yeah,
flower shop.
it was retail flowers, and they
Okay.
also grew their own. And they went to the city markets, which was at Haymarket in those days, right in the city centre of Sydney, and would purchase flowers and fruit and veggies as well. But when my grandmother took it over, she mainly just did flowers. My father then, he he left school when he was quite young, I think 13, and he started to work on the flower farm. But before that, when he used to go to school in town in Sydney, he went to quite a, um, a posh school, and he would on the weekend he'd forage Banksia foliage and different foliages from the bush, and he'd take them with his father to the flower markets and sell them and earn a few shillings back then, and then he'd go off to school. He said all his buddies had wealthy parents, and they all got pocket money, but the only way he could get some pocket money was to pick the green and sell it in the markets before catching the train across to the school. And then, so my father left school at 13 and started working with his father on their flower farm at Sutherland, um, providing flowers to Scott's Florist. That was the name of the florist. And then as he got older, his father and him bought a property at Menai, which is the place where I grew up, and they started farming there. They paid, I think, £4,000 back then, but I hear the story that £3,000 was for the bulldozer and £1,000 was for the property, and they used that bulldozer to clear the property. Uh, and then later on, my dad opened or bought a small business in a cemetery at a place called Rookwood, which was a large cemetery. And then he would grow flowers at Menai and sell them in the flower markets at Sydney, and also sell them in Rookwood Cemetery. And he made a lot of money there. He always would say that people love to put good flowers on the graves. They don't want rubbish. They want to, put good flowers on the grave to um, say say things. I don't know, just say things to the people that they've lost.
Right.
So following that, so I started my life as a motor mechanic, and I did my trade. I enjoyed doing that, and life was pretty simple. And then Dad said, "Would you be interested in coming and helping me on the flower farm?" Yeah, he was getting to a stage where he wasn't quite sure whether he wanted to continue, but he thought he'd give me the opportunity. Um, so I thought about it for a bit. My mum was a bit unsure, but in the end, I took the opportunity and I left motor mechanics and went to work with Dad. And I did I got the shock of my life actually because I remember one morning, I'm sleeping in. It's I think it was Sunday, and I'm having a sleep. And Dad said, "Come on, we got to get up. We got to pick the dahlias." He said, "We got so many. We're going to have to go to market on Monday instead of Tuesday, which we would normally go." So that was a bit of an eye opener. But at that time we grew quite a few traditional flowers, dahlias, zinnias, asters, and but my dad had a passion for the bush and the Australian native bush, and he used to forage a little bit, bush picking as we call it, um, and he really brought new products into the flower market that way. Other people were bush picking too, but they just picked the standard things. But my dad would pick things like a pacris, um, Bimey lilies, Dorianthe, which is a really large flower. Nobody had ever sold those products in the market. And he'd also make up mixed wildflower bouquets, which would have 10 to 12 different foliage or flower species in them. And that was really early days before anybody was doing that with wildflowers. So that his passion sort of um, moved over to me a bit. He also had him and Mum bought a property at Mangrove Mountain. That's the one where we farm now. And he started growing some native plants up there: Geraldton wax, eucalyptus for foliage and flower, kangaroo paw, paper daisies. But it was like 2 hours from where we lived at home, so
Mm.
it was a pretty
That's
hard
hard.
call. Um, I followed Dad's footsteps and started studying horticulture, which was really great. Enjoyed studying. It was hard, you got to learn all your botanical names, as anybody who's done a horticulture course would know. You got to pass pretty tough tests in doing that, getting 70% correct and spelling correct. And the only way I could learn was the way that Dad learned, and he used to write them down. So you write a whole page of the botanical names. Once you could start to say them, you could spell them and you could write them. And it's amazing for me because I was quite a poor speller, but I got through that, and it's like one of those things you need to do.
Yeah. And
But
I know it is tough. It's very tough.
yeah, um, and then I uh, met Angela, my wife, and we got married, and we asked my mum and dad if it would be okay if we moved up to the farm at Mangrove Mountain and started growing wildflowers up there. So that's what we did in 1980, I think 87, and we did start growing the dahlias and asters and baby's breath, as well as growing wildflowers. Um, but it went well. That the second year we had extreme weather conditions, and I remember picking dahlias every day I went out for the whole season was in a rain jacket, which didn't bother me, but it's just hard work. And we started having problems with the dahlias. There's a disease, rhizoctonia, which many people would know. Started affecting the tubers from there, because before we were there, they grew potatoes, and I think the
Mm,
rhizoctonia came from the potatoes.
sure.
And I took the bulbs to a pathologist lab and asked him what's the problem, and And the researcher there, the senior pathologist there, said to me, "It's rhizoctonia." I said, "What can you do about it?" And he said, "There's nothing you can do about it. You need to get rid of those bulbs." And for me, I was almost in tears because those bulbs have been in our family for many years, and so it's quite sad. But anyway, I persisted growing dahlias for a little while, but it's hard work, and the dollar value hadn't gone up in them for many years, and you worked right through the summer, as people would know. Um, it was a long haul, and I started getting the love of Australian flora more. So I made the decision actually to stop growing dahlias and concentrate on growing wildflowers and Australian native wildflowers. But I wanted to grow them in a way similar to traditional flower growers. I had a mentor, a guy who I did a little bit of work for, Greg Lamont, and he said, "What's your productivity of your growing area?" And he kept asking me that, and I thought, well, that's something I've got to do. I've got to look at that productivity. And so I grew kangaroo paw just the same way I would grow my asters, and I was looking for increasing the supply and the time of year that I could get the supply. So that's a bit of the background, how I got into growing flowers, I guess.
Wow. Well, it's interesting because that term wildflowers is one of those terms that is so depends on what we've envisioned when we think of wildflowers here in the States compared to what our wildflowers for you in Australia obviously are very different flowers. um I'm curious, do because I mean I know you guys, it's a huge continent, and it is farther south than sometimes people think. I think. What are the seasons like there? Because I know I've asked this question of other growers, but when you're growing wildflowers, are there still cycles? Are there still seasons where some things produce year round? Or is there always something blooming? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because one thing I love about our growing wildflowers is that they're very seasonal. We don't have quite the same seasons like you guys have, thankfully. Uh, our climate range is much milder. Um, but we've got different growing regions. So Western Australia is completely different to the east coast of Australia. So there's plants that are grown in Western Australia that we really struggle to grow on the east coast. Victoria can grow a lot of the Western Australian species. Um, so what that means is there's so many different species that can be grown. So what we have in Sydney, we have what we call Sydney sandstone, and that region is very prolific with wildflowers, a lot of flowering species, a lot of different wattles, acacia. Flannel flowers come from this region, epacris, boronia. There's many species, different flowering gums, different eucalyptus for foliage and nuts. Western Australia does have by far the most, though. It's it's incredible. I wouldn't even try and put a number on it. Botanists could, but not me. There's so many flowering plants from Western Australia. The thing that I love about the wildflowers that we grow is people think of wildflowers, or some people think of wildflowers as that hard, woody plant that can be seen in florists, and you can dry it out. You don't need to put it in the cool room. You can put it out the front of the shop. Doesn't matter. I I really hate that idea about wildflowers. I think they should be looked after and kept fresh. And there's so many delicate wildflowers that are beautiful and florific. There's the beautiful Banksias that are harder and woodier. But if you look after them, you'll get so much better lifespan out of them. You can have them in a vase for 3 weeks looking fresh, not 3 weeks looking dead and dry. You can, of course, dry them after that period, and you can have them in your house for a year. That's fine. But the freshness is something that I really appreciate about wildflowers, and, and the range in the textures, the styles. Like I said, from the hard, bigger flowers to the very delicate, soft flannel flowers, and many others like that.
How
I'm not sure
many?
if I've completely.
I was going to say, how many different species do you think you grow? Because that's
Okay,
the other
well,
thing. Because
yeah,
a lot of times people think of wax flower. You've mentioned flannel flower. I know proteas. I know banksias, or proteas, as you might say. But and you think of that, but I think because we in America haven't grown up with that, we don't
yeah,
realize there may be 50 different banksias. There may be hundreds of different, proteas. And there might, you know what I'm saying? I mean, and it's hard for us to grasp the kind of variety that, you see.
yeah. I guess what I was trying to say about the different climates, what what people can grow in Western Australia and Victoria and South Australia, I can't grow on the East Coast because we're
Sure.
more humid, have more rainfall in the summer, so we're susceptible to more disease. That's why we do try and modify our climates. We grow some in greenhouses. We drain our soil in some areas. We use grafting so that some of the really beautiful flowering plants will grow in our environment. So in terms of numbers of varieties and flowers, we actually have a list of what we grow on the farm, which is around 300. That is to do with varieties. So genera, species, and varieties. Genera, I've got a page here, but I didn't really add them up, unfortunately. But it's got to be about. Uh, I'll just quickly add it up.
No, it's okay. It isn't. No, I just
All right.
ballparking it. It's fine. That's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's looking about 40 genera, and so about a bit over 300 if you look at all the varieties and the
Sure.
species.
Sure.
Um,
Well, I mean, that's a lot. I mean, that's the thing is, I feel like a lot of times when American growers are looking at wildflowers or different things to grow, a lot of times I realize what you're saying that the west coast of Australia has so many more varieties that may grow than the east side, but in the states it's kind of the same way a little bit. But I would say that I feel like we still don't really look at 300 different things to grow that would fall in that wildflower category for us here in the US. And that was one of the things I really was hoping to talk to you about because I feel like sometimes on the floral side, the florist side, the people who buy flowers wholesale, that they don't always value these natives. Like, I feel like maybe, I don't know. I don't know if you have that problem in Australia or not, because I feel like sometimes they think, oh, that came from the roadside, which maybe it was cultivated, but their attitude is that it's not worth what this other flower is, that whatever. And I think that's a shame because i I know I drive I've said this on the podcast before. I drive my family crazy because I'm driving down the road and I'm like, what was that? That would make a great cut flower. I mean, I'm like totally going, crazy. And then when you
yeah.
hear the stories, and I know, I've shared this before too, but things like Liatris, things like Solidago, things like that were American wildflowers that we dismissed. Other people in other parts of the world took, hybridized it, they grow it in other places, and then they import it now into the US.
Yeah.
Drives me crazy. And so I'm like, I just want to have that conversation about the value in growing natives because I want to really explore here in the US and I mean, yeah, I think it's insightful that I think you said it was your dad. I couldn't remember if it was your grandfather or your dad did this foraging and he obviously had an eye for what had value, what was exclusive, what seemed special that florists would pay money for. And that's a gift. I mean, that is really a gift to be able to do that. And how do florists respond to your products, your native product that you're growing? Do they embrace it? Do they kind of? I mean, you obviously sell a lot of it because you I know you grow a lot. So
Yeah.
I'm just curious your thoughts.
Yeah. Well, just firstly, I traveled in America back in the 80s, actually, and up in the Rocky Mountains in springtime. And I saw all your beautiful wildflowers. And with my passion for wildflowers, I think all of those areas need to be protected.
Right.
This is a bit of a tangent to your question,
No, but it's
but
legitimate.
yeah, and I would love to see wildflower regions all around the world protected and not lost. Um, so back to your question, uh, I think there's a real scope for that beautiful wildflower look, and somebody who specialises in wildflowers, whether it's in America or Australia, I think you can really create a niche, and you might have to work for it. You might have to educate your florist and your consumer, but there's so many people who have that real passion for wildflowers, just like you, just like me, and so there's a market there. But you are right. Sometimes there is a bit of pushback. I don't tend to find it because we've been working for many years on
Right.
building florists, just helping florists to become aware of what's available. And we do have a beautiful range. And one thing that the florists love about the range is the seasonality. So,
Mm.
you can get tulips, chrysanthemums, roses, liliums any time of the year. So I find that the florist will come into our stand first off and we'll just be hit hard. And you look around the market, it's a little bit embarrassing sometimes. You look around the market and then florists aren't really on the other stands yet. And I think they come to our stand first. This has been in the past. I hope it continues. But they come to our stand first because they know it's seasonal and they know there's a limited supply and they want to see what's fresh and what's different. And they'll grab that and then they'll go off and, unless they've got a wedding or something that they've got to go and chase up, um, they'll come to our stand first and then they'll go off and buy the things that they know they can get from, 10 different wholesalers. Um, they'll do that later. So one of the things, as I did mention before about, people have this conception that, oh, it's a wildflower. Can we put this out the front of the shop and, that can be the draw card for the customers. And as I said, I say no, like look after the flowers and people will enjoy them so much more. Um, so it has taken a little bit of time, I guess. And the more that we introduce new products and new interesting products into the market, whether it's a soft um, Thai lotus, which is one of the mullas, or the new pink flannel flower.
Yes. Oh my
It
gosh.
just
Yes.
Yeah, it just really opens their eyes. Even grevillea flowers that people in the past would say, oh, they just don't last. It's about how you look after your flowers. So teaching florists how to look after them, also teaching the growers how to grow and harvest the grevilleas so that they will get better longevity out of the flowers. So it's an ongoing thing. I I heard maybe years ago, actually, my dad told the story. I think he'd been speaking to an American grower or wholesaler, and he said he supports florists um, doing demonstrations because that's how the other florists learn about your flowers. And I thought that's such an important thing. Florists are our marketers. It's no good us growers marketing to the public. Florists are out there marketing to the public all week long. So it's important for us to market to our florists and to show them what's new in wildflowers, how to use them. And I particularly like to support younger florists. So we would run Wildflowers Australia, which is one of our grower organisations, and Bettina Gold now is the one that mainly led the work in this, but she would run workshops called Wild About Flowers. And I would work closely with her, always sponsoring that event. And I'd always encourage her to use young florists. So florists that are friends have so many young friends in the florist industry. And we need to be encouraging those younger florists to start using wildflowers and be comfortable using wildflowers. Yeah, some of the older florists would say, oh, they're too hard and woody. But if we can convince the younger florists to be using these products, then that's the future of our industry. I,
I
I
love
mean,
that actually.
there's wonderful older florists as well who have passion for wildflowers. But I just feel like in the past, they've thought of the Banksias as being hard and woody and dry, and that's not where we want to go.
Right. Well, I want to ask. You just touched on something that this is why I love doing this because there's things I don't even think to ask, and then you say something, and I'm like, oh, let's dig in on that a little bit. So
Yes.
let's talk about like Grevillea care or Banksia care or
Yeah.
Protea or Protea. You're gonna have me saying Protea before this is over. Protea care and what are things that florists should know or to treat this product with the respect that it deserves so that way they have more success with this product.
Yeah. Okay, great. Firstly, can I just address the Protea Banksia issue?
Yeah, sure.
It's not an issue in America. I know that you call Banksias and Proteas, pretty much. I'm not sure if I'm 100% right there, but I have heard that before. In Australia, wildflower people who are passionate about Australian native flowers really get uptight about Proteas, which are a beautiful flower out of South Africa, being confused with Australian native flowers. They're all beautiful flowers and they work well together at times. But we just get upset sometimes when the South African flower is called an Australian native flower. And I reckon that South African people would get upset too if they were hearing that their Protea, their King Protea, their national flower emblem is being called an Australian Protea. Anyway, that's just my bit of a hobby horse. But back to care of flowers. So that we have a lot of students come around, forestry students, and one thing I say to them is make sure you get a good pair of sharp secateurs. Buy a good pair, spend $100 and keep it sharp. Use a diamond sharpener, keep them sharp and clean, and they'll last you forever as long as you don't lose them. And we do deal with a lot of woody stems, and unless you've got a good pair of secateurs, um, you'll hurt your wrist, and it'll just be hard work. You could also do with a small folding pruning saw, but sharp secateurs are the best. A lot of florists will tend to use just a scissors or a knife. Use them as well, but you really need the secateurs. So I always say to There's things like grevillea, flowering eucalyptus that can have a short vase life if they're not looked after. Some of the looking after needs to be done with the wildflower growers. So they need to pick in the cool of the day, keep them in a cool place once they've picked them, get them into water as quick as possible, and get them into the cool room. For the florists, when they get them, don't leave them lying on the bench too long. Recut the stems and put them in deep water. And I
Mm.
always say that some flowers can deal with a tiny bit of water, but your woody wildflowers need more water, and they drink a lot of water. So you might put one in a vase one day, make sure it's at least half full of water, and then top that water up the next day because it'll drink a lot of water. So if you do that with your with your things like your grevillea, recut them, deep water. When we cut grevillea on the farm, we cut them and we fill the bucket almost to the top so that they have a really good drink. And if they wilt at that stage, we throw them away. But we find with grevillea, you can get up to 7 to 10 days if you look after them properly. And you can even transport them. So, I do have growers transporting grevillea to me in boxes, which come overnight. As long as they've been treated right at the harvest stage, they will transport okay.
And do you put them
They're probably the main
into,
things.
sure, well, do you put them into any kind of particular solution, like with food? Like, I've heard that some proteas will, like they like a little more sugar in their water. They're heavy feeders, so to speak. I don't know if that's a difference with Banksias or Grevilleas or any of the others, but I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, well, just coming back to the proteas. So as as florists would know, they've got the issue with leaf blackening
Right.
um, at times, and that's a problem that they have that is very random, and the science is still out. What does cause this leaf blackening? It's been looked at for many years. Um, so, and there was talk at some stage of using sugars to reduce that leaf blackening. I'm not sure where the where the what the best remedy is at this stage. I usually tell florists that the leaf blackening could occur, and there might not be a reason why it's occurring, and to just remove all the leaves and use the flower. The flower will still be good and will still last quite a while, and use them in a bouquet where you don't need the leaves. Um, in regards to using solutions, we actually don't use any solutions on the farm. We have in the past, and there has been some research work done in it, and I might not be 100% correct in what we do, but we don't worry as long as the water's fresh. Sometimes I might use a bit of bleach or citric acid, but generally we just use fresh, clean water. And the most important thing is the depth of the water, as I was mentioning.
Yeah, there's several flowers that I'm a firm believer in deep water, and I know that I get I have coworkers or I have florists who really push back on me on this because it's heavy. It's a heavier bucket to lift, right? And I'm
Yeah,
like, I
yeah.
know, but I think it's so much better for certain flowers. Not every flower, but certain flowers, it's definitely makes a difference. So
Uh,
I'm really
yeah,
glad to hear you say that.
yeah, I think you're right. The, the only other thing I'll add is like when we harvest the grevillea, we put it in that very deep water, and then after it's been conditioned in that deep water, um, we'll bunch the grevillea, we'll recut it, grade it, and then we'll put it into a bit more of a standard depth. Um, it won't be a shallow depth, but it won't be as heavy as
Right.
a full bucket of water.
Sure. So at the market, your business, East Coast Wildflowers, is in the Sydney flower market, right?
That's right.
And so, do you guys only sell Australian product, or do you also sell any import product? Do you like mix any of that in, or I'm kind of just curious how your business at the market works.
Yeah, okay. I'll tell you a little bit about the Sydney flower markets to start with. So, um, it's um, it's a very busy place. This will get some hate mail. I say it's one of the best markets in the world, and the reason I say that is we have such a variety of flowers. So you might have a lot in New York, and I guess in Europe you have a lot, but in Sydney we have a lot of those traditional flowers as well. But we also have this vast range of Australian flora and South African flora that's grown here in Australia. So it's an exciting place. The florists come in at 5 a.m. Um, and it's very, except for the moment, it's a little bit quiet. But it's in the past, the doors would go up and people would be ducking under the doors to run in. Doesn't happen anymore, but people do wait at the door and come in and rush around, and it's hectic. So the market is full of flowers, many stall holders. I think there's about 300 stalls in there. A lot
Wow.
of them are wholesalers, have multiple stalls, but the aisleways can be very busy, and so that creates a real exciting vibe, even though it's 5 a.m. in the morning. Um, so a lot of the wholesalers, which we're a wholesaler, we sell for other people as well as us. We would start at midnight. When it's busier, we start earlier,
How do
and
you how
that
do you
what
that's a, earlier than midnight? How do you start earlier than midnight? I don't know. Yeah.
yeah, or just when it's busy, you just need to, unfortunately, and it's amazing. You get there, you need your coffee straight away, and then the time just goes. Like from the moment you're there to the moment you're packing up, you're just busy. Uh, it's a great environment, and it's a love hate. So like you'll you'd hate having to get up in the night. Only having 2 or 3 hours sleep before going. But it's a real there's camaraderie there. You get friends with the florists, uh, friends with the other growers. It's a great environment. It's very competitive, and it can be tough. There can be arguments, but generally there's a good
Right.
feeling, family feeling almost. Um,
So is that every day? Because I know like there's some places I want to say it was San Francisco, but like LA opens early, but not that early every day.
yeah,
Is that every day, like Monday through Saturday, or Monday through Friday, or how does that work?
yeah. Well, the the three big days a week for Sydney are Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.
Okay,
And there's a few wholesalers open. Thursday's a quiet day, and there's more wholesalers open, and it's not too bad, but it's quite fairly
yeah.
quiet. Saturday is a day that tends to be a public day. You get a lot of public come through, and some florists come in early and get out. It can be quite busy with public. Um, just, just trying to think. So what traditionally used to be Friday was one of the busiest days. Now we're finding that Wednesday is the busiest day. People are buying for their weddings and events on the weekend, on the
Sure.
Wednesday, getting prepped more. So that's probably our hardest day. There are a number of couriers that come into the market and ship to the country areas, and so Wednesday's the busiest day for that.
That makes
We
sense.
tend to just sell in the flower markets. I don't sell flowers direct from my farm at all. I'm always trying to discourage that. Get quite a number of requests, but it's just too hard to manage. We we have we're operating on about 3 stands in the market, which is just enough space for us, and we have a warehouse there with a cool room. So that's where we pack all our orders before moving into the flower markets. We have
Wow.
a dried flower section upstairs, which is all naturally dried product.
That's
Um,
great.
yeah, there's a lot of the bleached and coloured products sold in the markets out of China and other areas, but I just keep with sort of naturally dried Australian flora and some other products.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. Well, okay, so there's so many things I still want to talk about, but we've got to talk about growing two
Yeah,
things. One is flannel flower because that is such a popular flower that we have such a hard time getting. And then the other thing I want to let's talk about that first. So flannel flower is a native, Australian native. Is that correct?
that's correct. It grows in the Sydney sandstone region, up the coast a little bit. It also grows inland in some regions, but it's more in a region that's a bit elevated, not cold, but needs quite sandy, well-drained soils.
Well, does it when is it season?
Its main season is September to about November, December, depending on its location. So most of the flannel flowers are coastal and they would flower September and into October in the southern hemisphere, of course. Um,
I hear it's even for Australians like to produce it, like in production, like sometimes it's challenging. And you would think it's such a popular flower there would be more people trying to grow it, but because I know I mean we used to be able to even like when we would import from Japan, like we could get some from Japan, but they told me that one of their main growers that supplied their auction um, in the south of Japan like isn't growing it anymore, and I'm just like and so there aren't too many. It's I think just because of the distance and the fragility of the flower, like I don't think there's anybody really exporting it from Australia because you guys probably can sell all of it that you have. You don't need to do that. But
yeah.
it was crazy. Like I'm used to seeing, flannel flower like I don't know, maybe
In Australia, flannel flowers are a protected plant. They shouldn't be picked from the wild. If you have private property where they're growing, it's possible that you're still allowed to pick them from that private property. We cultivate all our all our flannel flowers.
that makes sense. Well, I was really surprised because I think I was going through your Instagram and I noticed you or someone speaking from stage, and I want to say I saw flannel flower that Instagram the magic of photography, but it looked like it might have been almost a meter tall. I mean, it looked like it was really pretty substantial. Does it get that tall?
Yeah, there's no trick photography there.
See,
It's
that even makes me more frustrated that it gets that tall. And then I know I had sent you an email and again in the middle of the email I was scrolling and I had recently seen the pink flannel flower, which if people love flannel flower, you will love the pink one. But I was flipping through and I saw it on your Instagram, so I was like, oh, I know you know what it looks like, and you've seen it. Is that something you're cultivating too, or is that still in the preliminary stages? And is it as easy to grow or hard to grow as the white one?
yeah, good question. We've been cultivating it for since about 2016. It has a shorter lifespan, so it's more an annual, whereas the Actinotus helianthi, the normal flannel flower that you would know, can live for a number of years.
Really?
So the pink flannel flower, Actinotus forsythia, it's got a really interesting habit. So it grows in the wild, only in it in some small regions, um, and it can lay dormant in the soil for up to 50 or 60 years. And we had a mass flowering event as a number of people would have seen on Instagram. And that was following the really devastating bushfires that we had, I think in 2019, and then we had a lot of rain following those bushfires. And then about 8 to 9 months later, we had this mass flowering of pink flannel flowers. Nobody had seen it since in the 1950s.
Oh
So
my
just
goodness.
incredible. Yeah, just incredible. I think it gets sort of once it flowers and produces seed, drops the seed into the soil, and then the other native plants sort of grow over and smother
Sure.
that growing area. So I think that's probably the reason. Um, but to cultivate it, it's actually, we've been finding, touch wood, that it's not that hard as long as you got fresh seed. And as I
Mm,
said, there was a group of passionate wildflower growers who sort of introduced it to some of the nurseries back in around 2015. And I purchased 6 plants, and from that time we've collected the seed off our own plants, and we had quite a few last year. I'm not sure, maybe up to 300 plants. And they're really beautiful, difficult to pick. They get very tangled, uh, but they're really lovely, very special.
yeah.
And they'll only last for about maybe 3, 4 months, 5 months, and then they're finished. They sort of run out of steam and die. So you need to make sure you're collecting seed off the plants that you've got, and and putting them in the next season. We actually do a few plantings, so we have some following on to have a bit of more continuity.
Sure. Sure. Yeah,
We've
that's really
developed
cool.
we've developed a bit of a method of uh, not wiring them up, but just training them up because they fall and get tangled. And so we're using netting to try and train them. It seems to be working okay, but they're still hard to pick.
Yeah. Well, things like that, that delicate too, I think are always difficult. One of the other flowers that recently has intrigued me, and I was really excited because I was, as I was perusing some of your photos, I noticed many varieties of Telotus, and that's, um, I think that's how you pronounce it. It always throws everybody off because it begins with a P that's silent, and then
Yeah.
it's just Telotus. And the one that we see both being grown by local flower farmers here in the States and in South America is, I think, Matilda. Telotus Matilda is I think that's the species. And I was I was blown away because I saw this photograph, and I'm gonna mess it up because I didn't write it down and to look at it. But I want to say it's like, is it macrocephala or macro something, big flower something.
Yeah.
And it was white, and it looked like it was more not as branchy as the Telotus Matilda is. And I was just like, oh, why can't we grow that? I want to grow. And I always want, the grass is always greener on the other side of the world, right? And so I was like, why can't we grow that? So, and it looks like you guys might grow 5 species of Telotus. Is that right? I mean,
Yeah, probably even a couple of others that are a bit more insignificant, but probably about 5 that are our main ones. Yeah, macrocephala, that some people tell me that was trick photography, but on that Instagram shot. But I said no, not at all. Like
so how tall were those
it was beautiful.
stems?
They're probably about 700-800 long when they're really producing well in their main season.
Seven, 800
They
millimeters, centimeters. Us
yeah
Americans, we're not used to our
yeah
metrics over here.
yeah 2.5 foot.
Okay, 2.5 foot. All right. Well, that's pretty tall. I mean,
Yeah,
that it was pretty amazing. Does it hold up well? I mean, because it's so big, I didn't know if maybe had a shorter shelf life.
that's no, it holds well. Nearly all of the mullas hold pretty well.
So mulla
quite well,
mulla,
actually.
is that your common name for this? Mulla mulla?
Yeah, so yeah, Mulla Mulla is a common name for the Thai
It's
lotus.
it's a lot
Yeah,
easier to say, I think. So
yeah,
but
yeah.
okay, so which variety does the best for you? Because I want people to start growing more of this flower, and I think it's amazing.
Thai lotus exaltatus is so that's Matilda is one of those forms, and Joey is another one of the forms. They were bred, I think, in Germany,
Oh,
um,
okay.
even though they're Australian native. But so we grow one called Phoenix, which is an exaltatus type, and it produces very well for us. We find that's better. We do find it hard to get a second generation or a second crop off them. So you really need to get good productivity off your first crop. You need to be careful not to just pick it too early. You need to let it branch and try and make the most of it. Otherwise, it's not profitable.
Do you
We do
pinch
buy
it?
those plants from.
Do you
We do buy
pinch?
those plants.
Sorry, do
Oh,
you
pinch
pinch?
them.
Yeah.
We can we can cut the center stem out, but I tend to let it just grow larger, grow into a bigger flower, and then the surrounding stems are more mature then and ready to harvest. I I think you get a better shape to the piece that you've cut doing that. Um, so that's
But
Phoenix. We buy that from a tissue culture lab. Macrocephala, we do our own cuttings. That's a straight species variety. That's the white one that you're talking about. It strikes fairly well from cuttings, and it's quite a good producer for a couple of years. It does pick up a bit of disease, so we've thrown out a few plants this year and just started a new crop. So we're looking forward to that. There's Obavatus, which is a, another small form, small soft pink. It's quite lovely, mauvey, soft mauvey pink. Um, and a particular variety called Able Star, which was selected by a great guy, Peter Abel, um, back quite a number of years ago. Yeah, they're probably the Drumedy is another variety that we grow. It's quite a small one, but it's very magenta.
yeah, that's the
It's
darker pink one. Yeah, I saw that one, and I
yeah,
was really surprised
yeah,
at the darkness of the color. I thought it was really pretty.
yeah. So that's yeah. If it sort of 8 to 10 inches, maybe 12 if you're lucky. But people love to buy it. And my daughter, who I'd love to talk about at some stage, her name's Bess. She's got a shop in Paddington in Sydney, and she loves to buy it. She'll pick up a bucket of it, and so I don't know how she uses it. But anyway, she doesn't mind it being short.
Well, it's funny. Depending on the design style, there's always a creative way if you really are passionate about a flower to find a use for it. So I think that's great. That's really great. Do you feel like you said you bought most of them in from tissue culture, like plugs or um, things like that?
Yeah.
That's
So
just the easiest way for you to produce it, to grow it?
well, Thai lotus, um, excelsa, and particularly the phoenix. That's the only way we can get those
Okay.
varieties. That variety, I think. Some of the others you can grow from seed. You need to be a fairly good propagator. We do a lot of our own propagation from seed and cuttings, but we do find that we don't have great success with some of the Thai lotus. Um, but Macrocephala and Drumedy, we take them from cuttings, and they strike quite readily.
That's great. So, do they all have the same bloom cycle, or are these different species kind of act differently? I mean, especially like the bigger variety versus the smaller variety. Do they all bloom the same way? Do they? I mean, just because like we only know one variety, so it's like we don't we don't know all these other varieties, which I'm
Yeah,
hoping we can change. But I'm curious about that.
they tend to. Well, the exaltatus will flower fairly freely depending on when you plant it, um, but they will all peak in spring.
Okay.
Um, that's I think that's their real the best zone for them. But if you plant um, like when we plant Phoenix, it'll flower on maturity of the plant. So as it's growing, it'll flower. And so it's good you can get some for Mother's Day if you plant them early enough, which is our autumn.
Hmm.
But they will, if you plant them a little bit late, they will grow slowly and really peak just before spring. Um, tends to be the cycle, even though you do get a bit of out of season flowering.
Sure, sure. That makes sense. Well, I'm really, you know, glad to hear about some of these natives and some of your wildflowers, and I hope that we can start looking here with the same level of excitement at wildflowers, and I hope that you can inspire people to look at our natives and maybe start embracing them more, because that's one thing that's, I think, especially environmentally, when you think about travel, you think about all these other factors that you know drive the cost up of flowers, that we're trying to force certain flowers to grow that aren't happy in our climate, that you end up with frustrated flowers and expensive flowers, and even though natives I feel like they can demand a fair price. I'm really excited to hear about the conference that's coming up here in August, and I wanted you to share with our listeners about it. It's going, I know you said it was around the 18th or 19th of August, and this is kind of a big deal, and I wanted to kind of hear about it, and what are you guys going to do and talk about?
Yeah, well, we're pretty excited about it as well. It's our first national conference held in Australia since 2014, and there's a few issues there, COVID, but
Right.
also just it's hard to get the industry together, and we're really excited. The numbers of people who have shown interest in coming is quite good, and we've got a great lot of expertise in the people speaking at it, and we got a good lot of sponsors. So we're really excited. We got a program, a morning session where we're all together, and in the afternoon session we split into people interested in growing wildflowers, sort of new entrants into the industry, and and then in the other room it'll be people who have been in the industry quite a bit longer. So there's an emphasis on getting started in native cut flower growing. Um, that we're also, I mean, not just looking at Australian natives, we're looking at South African flora as well. Um, David Matthews from Proteaceae is one of our main speakers. Um, Ryan Webber from Wafex in Western Australia is talking about how to regenerate a farm that's been run down. They've bought a
Mm.
number of farms recently and have regenerated them. As maybe in America, in Australia, the industry needs more growers, and we need to a lot. In the past, people have gone out of the industry. We need to revitalize the industry and bring in new interested people. So that's the whole idea. Our dinner speaker is a great friend and a great communicator, Angus Stewart. He's done a lot of work in breeding kangaroo paw, and so he'll be talking about what's new, what's interesting, what's exciting in wildflowers. So yeah, we're really looking forward to a great event, and the second day is a day of just visiting a couple of flower farms in the region of Echuca Moama, which is on the New South Wales Victorian border. So that's a bit of a rundown on it.
That's great. Well, I feel
If
like,
anybody's interested,
yeah, I mean, I feel like it's really a great opportunity, because I know this is one of the, I've had some conversations with some Australian growers over the past 10 years, and I know that that has been a concern about, bringing new blood in and finding new growers and, revitalizing that passion in growers and the industry. And I feel like that is, it's a big deal, and I'm excited that you guys are reaching out, and that there's interest in it, and I hope you guys have a ton of success with it, because maybe that's something we can look at here too, is looking at this part of our horticulture palette, that we have there's tremendous resources here in the U.S. that, with the flora that we have, that maybe we can recapitalize on. So I can't wait to see what comes out of it and all that. Every time we end an episode, I always like to ask that advice question. Like, what piece of advice would you like to leave with our listeners? And it can be anything, but I wasn't sure if there was something that kind of means like something a lot to you, and you'd like to share with them.
yeah, I, I did think about that advice question before, and I covered it when we were talking, so I'm going to have to think of something new. But what I what I like to say is that growing flowers and selling flowers, it's a real special thing. And we I thought about what were some of the biggest jobs that I've been involved in, and then I thought, well, it's not just what's the biggest job you've been involved in. It can be a small job that's really important to somebody. And so I just wanted to share um, that with you, like whether it's a wedding, somebody wants, I just even thinking about when I got married, when me and Angela got married back in 1987, um, my wife wore Actinotus minor, which is a tiny little flannel flower. And I'd picked it from our farm at Mangrove Mountain, foraged on our property, and she wore it in her hair. And so that flower means so much to us. And so for brides, or when somebody's died, a flower is so important. And I just want to encourage people to really love what they do, and love sharing those flowers with other people, because they really lift the spirits, and uh, something wonderful that we've been given, and uh, something that we can really cherish and share with others.
Yeah,
That's
I
probably
agree.
the comment.
No, I
uh,
think that's great, because I think that sometimes we forget the privilege and the excitement that we bring other people. We don't we look at it all the time, right? And sometimes it's
yeah,
hard to forget. We need to remind ourselves of that. So,
yeah.
well, Craig, thank you so much. Thank you for being on the Flower Podcast.
Thanks, Scott. It's been wonderful.